Hey, good evening, YouTube. Good day. Whatever time it might be for you. So this is going to be a Tuesday rant. I'm going 2 in a row since yesterday, I guess. I don't know. I could say things a lot more colorfully, I think, to actually classify it as a rant, but we'll keep it toned down here. So article coming across the radar this morning. Trump administration sues California again. This time over rights to sell public land. The biggest problem I'm going to have with this article, I'm going to read this article. I printed it out. I wanted a reference. These are the same people who are telling Cliven Bundy to bow down to the federal government and to accept federal government authority over land, and that it wasn't his and that he had no rights to it, etc., etc. I'm going to read this article. You're going to hear it in here. It's the same people, I guarantee you, they were saying that, you got to accept the federal government's ownership of this and yada yada, and it is what it is, and it's public lands. But yet, when it comes to California, now all of a sudden they're states' right advocates, and they believe in state ownership of land, etc. If people would unite, take back their authority, you wouldn't have these problems. But instead, you all want to marginalize each other over nitpicked, divisive issues. So I'm going to read this. In its latest legal salvo against California, the Department of Justice, and this is McClatchy News Service, Kate Irby and Stuart Leavenworth, all citations appropriately used. The Department of Justice announced Monday it is filing suit against what it branded an extreme state law that tries to give California power to veto sales of federal land to private interests. Federal government can't sell land. It's backwards. The Constitution clearly says it. The federal government has to buy it from a state. Right there, right off the bat. State law, which was signed into law in 2017, gave state officials the right to purchase any federal land in California. The U.S. government tries to sell to private ownership. Shouldn't be able to be done to begin with. About 50% of California is public land. Justice officials argue the state law is unconstitutional under the Supremacy Clause, which says that when state laws conflict with federal laws, the federal law is the ultimate authority, and because it discriminates against land sales by the federal government specifically, and there is no constitutional authorization for the federal government to sell land. Federal law says the Bureau of Land Management, which can select public land for sale if it meets certain criteria. Federal law cannot contravene the Constitution. Under our federalism, states have the right to pursue their own policy objectives, but they do not have the right to actively obstruct federal policy, interfere with federal actions, or discriminate against the United States, said Jesse Panuccio, Acting Associate Attorney General. Article 10, nullify. That's how you get in the Fed's way. I'm going to have to separate my commentary from the article. I don't want to confuse you. But you might be able to tell the difference of when I'm reading from the article when insert my own comments. Hopefully. Quote, California has once again passed an extreme statute found in no other state to obstruct the federal government. Wrong. Nevada took back the rights to its public land 3 times by voter decree and to change the Constitution 3 times. The legislature failed to act. This, still in the quotes, this time by interfering with the conveyance of federal lands, he said. Federals can't convey land, period. The litigation marks the second time in a month that McGregor Scott, U.S. Attorney for California's Eastern District, has helped launch a lawsuit against the state. On March 7th, Scott joined Attorney General Sessions at a California Peace Officers Association meeting to announce a lawsuit against California's sanctuary policy for undocumented immigrants. So they're using their buddies that are in cahoots with them to conspire against the people to kind of go at them on this issue as well. In 2017, California filed 24 lawsuits against the Trump administration. Involved were 17 separate issues, including immigration, environmental protection, and the president's proposed U.S.-Mexico border law. So again, it's only on things California feels, convenient to them. It's not on actual basis of states' rights an actual constitutional principle. It's about their feel-good stuff. State officials characterize the latest justice suit as another attack by the Trump administration on Californians' very way of life. Safeguarding public lands is in our DNA as Californians. If that was the case, you would take your land back from the feds to begin with. So much so that we have enshrined the principle in our state constitution. Take your land back, Governor. That's who said State Lieutenant Governor and State Lands Commission Chairman Gavin Newsom. Newsom's the Lieutenant Governor. I didn't even realize that. California, no wonder you're so screwed. Who is also a leading candidate for governor. Yeah, you're really screwed. We'll use every legal and administrative tool to thwart Trump's plan to auction off California's heritage to the highest bidder. Do it, California. I fully back you to take back your land from the federal government. Let's do it. Well, you can do it. Meanwhile, the state of Jefferson will go their own way. Do it. Pass your constitutional amendment to your constitution. Take it back. Senior justice officials were not shy about the targeting of California, saying during a briefing on the issue Monday their action was a product of the extreme nature of laws that have been passed in California recently. Panuccio called the state law another example of California avoiding federal law, and no state legislature can, statute by statute, undermine the rule of law in the U.S. Constitution. If the law is contravention to the Constitution, it's not law anyway. States have the ability to nullify federal law. They absolutely can. He warned that whether California legislators and the governor like it or not, they must comply with the terms of their admission to the Union and their oaths of office to uphold the U.S. Constitution. Well, there, Mr. U.S. Attorney General, acting Panuccio, whatever your title was, maybe you should check your Constitution instead of your law training. He warned that whether California legislators and the governor like it or not... Oh, I already read that. Attorney General Jeff Sessions then blamed California for wasting public resources in a rare and lengthy public statement Monday evening. He's blaming them for wasting resources. Who wastes more public resources? Their Attorney General. He targeted California state laws, saying they made lawsuits by the Justice Department necessary. He also cited lawsuits filed against the federal government by California. Hey, bottom line, this ain't going to be solved in court. California, if you're going to do it, you got to do it. You can't go to court and expect the federal government to decide against itself. That's not going to happen. We are forced to spend our resources to bring these lawsuits against states like California that believe they are above the law and are passing facially unconstitutional laws specifically intended to interfere with the federal government's ability to carry out its legitimate law enforcement duties, Sessions said. Wait, I thought we were talking about land transfer, not law enforcement duties. Oh, well, he's talking about the immigration thing. He's sidebarring, and the author of this article sidebarred with him, it looks like. And getting into that, yes, immigration naturalization is a federal government authority, but it doesn't mean the state has to go along with it. The state doesn't have to actively enforce federal immigration law, but they can't hinder it. I would agree with that. It's a constitutional issue and a rule of law issue, and more frequently now a question of how we are allocating our taxpayer dollars to protecting Americans from violent crime and a raging drug epidemic. So he's going on about the immigration thing. Let's get back to the land thing. The latest justice litigation helps bolster Trump's standing with GOP lawmakers in Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, and other western states who have long complained about excessive federal land holdings in their states. Some of the lawmakers have called for federal legislation that would transfer federal public lands to the state private ownership. If California got on board with that, how quickly could that happen? You know what I'm saying? Or just state by state, do it. California passed its own legislation after Representative Jason Chaffetz of Utah introduced legislation that would have transferred millions of acres of federal land to private or state ownership. He withdrew the bill in February of 2017 after public pressure from hunting and fishing groups. Everybody's got their own little special group that thinks they're going to get sidetracked by their state. How can you possibly think you're going to get a better treatment from somebody 2,500 miles away than you are somebody right there in your backyard or even, within a couple hundred miles if your state capital is what you're concerned about going to. Trump administration officials have said they're opposed to selling federal land, which they don't have the authority to do, to other interests, but senior justice officials say the state initiative goes beyond selling land within public parks. The federal attorneys argued it could disrupt how the federal government contracts with private actors to build facilities for the military, for example. It's covered in the Constitution, military posts, etc. You can't interfere with that. That's cut and dry. The complaint lists 3 examples of how the federal government planned to sell certain public lands in the state that could be prevented by the California law, including the Department of the Army's plan to sell to a developer 78 acres of federal property in Alameda County for construction of facilities at Camp Parks, an Army military installation. Land originally came from the state, if you follow the Constitution. Originally state hands was transferred to the feds, if you follow the Constitution. State should be the first buyer of resort, if that's the case. Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke, a former congressman from Montana, has repeatedly said he opposes the sale of federal lands. His goal, he said, is to work with the states to open up recreational opportunities on public lands. No, return the land to the states. We're not transferring or selling public land, Zinke said in a January interview with conservative radio commentator Josh Talley. Shout out to Josh. What we're doing is we're working with the states to open up recreational opportunities. We don't need recreation. We need to return to the Constitution. We don't want to be in an adversarial role, and that's been the tension out west. Is that the local voice? And recreation is not the issue. There's so many other things. The federal government benefits from all the different land leases for mineral rights, water or oil, gas rights, everything else. The federal government benefits from all that, and the states get shafted. And that's been the tension out west. It's the local voice, communities that have been ignored, and that's not right. How about the states listen to their local voice, leave the feds out of it? David Hayes, a former Interior Department official in the Clinton-Obama administrations, called it odd for the Justice Department to go after California on this issue if the Trump administration is not interested in selling federal lands. Whatever the motivation, I suspect Attorney General Becerra will have something to say about state prerogatives that attach should the feds renege on their promises, said Hayes, who directs the State Energy Environmental Impact Center, a group that assists attorneys on environmental litigation. So again, California's on their little pet projects, not standing on constitutional principle, but on they're going to go after some Endangered Species Act and protecting some bird and slug and everything else. California officials assert they have the authority to implement the state legislation because they wouldn't be preventing the sales of the land. Instead, they would prevent private purchasers from recording deeds to the land unless the state was allowed the opportunity to buy the land first. And here goes back to original deed ownership. If the state records a deed and they're the only person that can register a deed because the federal government can't do it, it's the state's land to begin with. Recording a deed is how a purchaser gives public notice of the right to a parcel of land. Without a recorded deed, many banks will not lend money or develop the property, or a purchaser cannot get title insurance, etc., making a recorded deed much more valuable than an unrecorded deed. Yeah, take an unrecorded deed, see how far you get with that. The land recording system is set up under state and not federal law because states own the land. That's why it's like that. So California officials argue the state is within its rights to pass laws regarding recorded deeds. So actually, California's got a good angle here in how they limit this, and they're going after it in how they record deeds. And here it goes on: a person who does not record a deed in violation of law could be fined up to $5,000. Senior justice officials argued that saying the federal government could sell land but could not record a deed is a distinction without a difference. Back at you. California, good on you for trying to make a difference in certain ways, but take the constitutional argument. Don't keep your little pet project of environmental protectionism, or whatever you're doing, whatever your angle is. That's not how you're going to win this fight. If the western states could unite, especially with California's legislative might, for lack of a better word, how could you not get back your public lands? Really? People need to get together, tell the feds, pack sand, take your land back. It's all right there. It explains how and why it is state land. I don't know. Just a short Tuesday, not short Tuesday rant. May went a little longer than hoped. Live free.